If you are either wanting to or feeling forced to start home educating, I'm going to tell you what you need to do in order to get to a place where you're eligible to start home educating, and then how to actually start. I hope you'll get to the end of this video feeling like you got support, reassurance and guidance on how to start. If you're watching this, you probably fall into one of two camps. So number one, you have a primary school application deadline coming up, and something about sending your child to school this September just isn't feeling right. Whether that's owing to your child's current abilities or temperament, your family values, or just the way you feel about the school system. Or your child is already of school age and they're already at school, they've been struggling, but you want to give them a fair chance to work through any problems, and you decided to give school one more chance, maybe at the beginning of the year or the beginning of a new term, but you've gotten to the point where it's just not going to work anymore. So yeah, let me know in the comments which of those camps you fall into, or if you're in a completely different situation. So let's start with what you need to do in order to get to the point where you're actually eligible to start home educating. And this will be slightly different whether your child is currently in school or not. I will caveat that I'm basing this on where I live, which is in England, and rules do differ even within the UK, I believe, so it's worth double checking up on where you live and what the rules are there. If you're like us when we started home education and your child has never been to school, then what you need to do is nothing. Let me explain what I mean by that. From the time your child was born, you have essentially been home educating them. We'd probably technically call it unschooling, I guess. You've helped your child to learn to walk and talk, in some cases read, and to the best of a child's ability, you have taught them to be members of the society that we live in. You've read to them, you've let them play, you've engaged with them in the things that they found interesting, you've taken them to playgroups and activities, and you've taken them along with you while you do all those things we do in life. So when it comes to the age that you're meant to apply for a school place, simply do nothing. If you're certain that you want to home educate, then just don't apply for a school place. School is an opt-in service, so just don't opt in. You don't need to inform anyone of your decision not to apply, especially not your local authority. Home education is actually the default and school is what you are opting into. So do nothing and you are already set to start home educating, which could very well just continue to look exactly like things have looked for you up until now, or you might choose to do some of the things that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Now, if your child is already in school, regardless of how long they've been there for, you need to do just one thing, and don't let anybody else tell you any different. You need to deregister them. And this isn't as complex as it may sound, which I'll expand on in a minute, but first let me caveat that since my kids have never been in the school system, I've never had to deregister them. So I'm passing on second-hand information which is freely available. But I would point you in the direction of the Heifer Facebook group, which has plenty of deregistration templates which you can use. And if you search in the comments, there will be hundreds of other people who have also deregistered their child. But the reason that I say it's not as complex as it sounds is because if you have a child registered at a school in England, all you need to do is inform that school of your decision to home educate, and that decision applies with immediate effect. I see lots of posts on Facebook from people who have sent a deregistration letter and their school comes back and tells them that they have to come in for a meeting, or they have to inform the LA, or they have to wait till they get approval to home educate, and until that point their child has to come to school. That is absolutely not true. Once you have sent that deregistration email and informed the school of your decision to home educate, then you are officially home educating, and it is their responsibility to remove your child from the school register and inform the local authority. This is going to look a little bit different if your child is in a special school, but again, having no experience of this, I will point you in the direction of Heifer to ask any questions in relation to that. So whichever route you've taken, whichever way you've arrived at home ed, it is now time to start. And this is going to look different in many ways for many different families. It's going to depend on numerous factors such as your child's current abilities, their temperament, your family values, your family size, your religious beliefs, if you're in employment or not. The list could go on and on. Home education is going to look different to every family. My point here is there is no one size fits all way to home educate, and that is the wonderful thing about home education. Because in school, one size is made to try and fit every type of child and every type of family, which is impossible. But in home education, you can adapt that education to fit your child and your family. But having said that, I think there are some tips that will be applicable to most families at the start of your home education journey. And these are as follows, and I'm going to break them down into some do's and lastly some don'ts. So the first of my do's of starting home education has to be know your rights. And this is largely going to look like reading the official home education guidance available on the government website. I will link it below. And I think this is important to do before you are officially home educating. But if you haven't yet, don't panic, just make yourself a drink and sit down and have a good old read. This is all about knowing what is expected of you as a home educating parent, and also what the legal responsibilities of the local authority are. And it is so important to know because of the fact that so many of the local authorities try to overstep their remit. And the local authority or the school will try and tell you things like how many hours a day you should be home educating for, that certain subjects are essential, or that they have the right to come and see your child, to visit your child and see examples of their work, which isn't true. Like, a lot of the people who you would presume are really in the know about these things are really not, and so it's down to you to make sure that you are in the know. Ultimately, it's just about empowering yourself to make sure that you know what your responsibilities and rights are, and so other people don't need to tell you that or try and mislead you into believing something that isn't true. And it can seem a little bit overwhelming, a bit scary at first to go through that sort of document, but you will come out the other end feeling much better about it. And then if you ever have an incident like I did, where the local authority turn up on your doorstep, you will know how to handle it and not give them more than they are entitled to. Okay, so a good point to come on to number 2 of the do's is join Facebook groups. If you are new to home educating, you may not yet realise that a lot happens on Facebook. And that may come as a disappointment to some of you, but it really is a platform that you're going to want to be on when you start home educating in order to connect with other home educators and seek advice and find out about events going on. Even if you don't use Facebook on a personal level, I know there are a lot of people who have just signed up to use Facebook purely for home education reasons. So there are a few general or national Facebook home education groups that you can join. You know, I always go on and on again about Heifer because they are the group that has helped me the most during my home education journey, but other groups are available. Literally just type home education into the search bar on Facebook and you will see lots of groups come up. Another thing that I personally think is essential is to type in home education and your area you live in. And if you can't find one for your area, then ask or search in one of the national groups and someone will put you in that direction, because you are really going to want to connect with other home educators in your area, which leads me on to point number 3. So the next thing to do when you are starting home education is to attend some meetups. And I can hear all my fellow introverts and socially anxious folk dying on the spot when I say that, but it really does help, and that is for the following reason. There are going to be some times that you will start to question your decision to home educate. You've probably been in that place already. Or the social conditioning starts getting through. You start to feel like the only weird ones making this choice for your family. And you need that reminder that you are not weird. Your kids are not going to turn out weird. There are so many other people choosing, or sadly being forced to choose, this lifestyle. You are not the only one. We started attending home education meetups before the twins even reached compulsory school age. As certain as I was, I wanted to be able to kind of say, well, this is what I know the school experience is like, and now this is what I know the home education experience is like. And this is one of the first things you are going to get quizzed about by people who aren't home educating.
How is your child going to socialise?
Well, trust me, if your child is so inclined, then the only problem you're going to have is choosing which social events to turn down, because there is so much going on. Now, I appreciate that not everyone's child is going to want to go to home education meetups. for various reasons, and I'm by no means suggesting that you should force them to go. But personally, I think even if you're just connecting with other home educators online, or even just for yourself as the home educating parent, that it's going to help so much in so many ways. We're really the only ones who truly get each other and get what this experience is like and how it plays into so many different areas of our lives. So I think connecting with other people in this space is just going to be so important for your mental health, for giving you that encouragement that you are on the right track, for getting tips and ideas from, for finding out about which meetups are happening. I really think that needs to be one of your first ports of call when you are starting home education. Okay, on to our last do before we move on to some very important don'ts, and that is do deschool. Now, there could probably be a whole entire series of videos on deschooling, but I'll quickly talk about two aspects that I think are important. And I think this applies whether your child has been to school before or not, and I'll explain why in a minute. So if you've not heard the term before, deschooling is typically defined as the period after deregistering from school when a child makes that transition from learning at school to being educated at home. I've heard many home educators say that as a guide, it will take 1 month for every 1 year your child has been at school to deschool. But obviously this is going to vary somewhat from child to child. So this period for a child that's come out of school is often a time for recovery, time where zero expectation should be placed on them. And it may look like during this time absolutely no learning is happening, and that's absolutely fine because some learning will be happening, even if that is learning how to look after your mental health. They need time to recover and get out of that mindset that is created when they have spent usually a substantial period of time with a whole host of school expectations and rules placed on them. And another part of deschooling that I think is important to consider is, even if your child has never been to school, is deschooling yourself. Because I'm going to make the assumption that most of you watching went to school yourself like I did. And as much as you may feel like you've had the veil lifted and you can see school for what it is, whether you loved or hated school yourself, that is going to be to some degree ingrained in your mind as being the right and normal way to do things. Even for myself, who I feel like I've come to see school as deeply not normal in a lot of respects. Like, there's still parts of me, for example, like if my kids do any work on paper, whether that's in a workbook or something I printed off or they've written something down, I actually feel calmer and like we've achieved some learning just because it's on paper. And that comes from school, like, because it's ingrained in us that that's the way learning happens, is when you are doing something from a book or writing down something or working through a maths problem on a piece of paper. So I know that I have those tendencies still like deep rooted that I still have to work on. So as exciting as it is to start home education and be proactive and do all the things we've just talked about, there are definitely some things not to do, especially when you're first starting out. And the last one on this list I have to include because it's really important, because it can be quite serious if you do this thing that you shouldn't do. But let's go with some more light-hearted ones first. So number one, don't buy all the things. All the things. I think for those of us who went to school, one of the actually really enjoyable fun parts was back to school stationery shopping. I'm sure we all remember it, getting the new pencil case, the new pens, the notepads. It was great. And when you're home, oh, it's a cat. Is that my cat? No. And when you're home educating, you can go even bigger with this, with the new educational games, which is all games by the way, books about nature and the human body and math, and the learning resources, and the deliveries drop through the door. You get that lovely dopamine hit and it's great. And to a big extent, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm not berating you if you want to buy supplies. Just don't feel like you need to start home educating. In fact, when you're starting, like, really try and avoid it, because you don't know yet what's going to work for your child, what your child is going to be interested in outside of the school setting, and you could end up wasting a lot of money on books and resources that just sit there collecting dust. I've done it. Like, I did not always take my own advice. And also, like, think outside the box in terms of what you would buy for an education. It's not all workbooks and pencils, it's also welly boots and waterproofs and litter pickers and all kinds of weird and wonderful things that you wouldn't find inside the school walls. And speaking of school, will take us on to the second don't, and that you've probably heard this one before, like, don't try and do school at home. There's a reason that in the UK we say home education and not homeschooling, because it's really important to make that distinction that even on a legal level you don't have to create school at home. Unless your child really wants to, you are not going to want to be getting them to try and sit down at a desk at 9 AM completely ready for the day with a workbook in front of them
and do something for an hour, and then in the next hour move on to something completely unrelated, give them 1 hour in the middle of the day to eat and play, and giving them tests at the end of each week to see how much they've learned.
It's not going to look like a typical timetabled school day. And I have heard many stories or read many stories of people starting off this way and then getting into a right state because they can't keep up with it, their child isn't engaged with it, or worse, they're getting stressed out by it. And I've never tried it, but from what I've heard, like, trying to do school at home rarely works, and that is absolutely okay. But before I get onto the more serious one at the end, my third don't would be, don't worry about choosing a style of home education when you first start out. And there are loads of styles of education out there, like you'll probably have heard of like Charlotte Mason and Waldorf and Montessori, unschooling, etc. And I'm sure for a lot of people following these works really successfully. But I would say don't worry too much about this to begin with. Like, read up on them, see what you find interesting, what you think might work for your child, what you'd like to explore more of. By all means, sample different methods of doing things from different philosophies, I suppose you could call them. But again, with trying to stick to the doing school at home vibe, this could quickly lead to feeling overwhelmed and like you are not succeeding for your child because you're not able to stick to all the things that this particular educational philosophy subscribes to. We are not machines, and I think the key, especially when you're starting out, is just be flexible and try lots of different things from different styles, following your child's lead, and see which certain things stick with them. Okay, on to the really important one, the last don't. And if you try and do this, it could actually have some really serious complications. If the local authority contact you for information, don't just ignore them and pretend you haven't got the letter and hope it goes away and they will just stop contacting you. So as important as it is to know your rights and not provide them with more information than they are legally entitled to, such as home visits or pictures of your child or your child's work, it is equally as important to not just ignore them if they contact you. Like I've said a lot of times, and you've seen my video about when they turned up on my doorstep and then I then received a letter asking for more information. They actually asked me to fill out some forms, which I didn't do. I told them I would provide them with a written report, and I didn't enjoy doing it, and I do feel like it took away from home educating in the time that I was doing it, but I did it. I provided them with the information they needed to ascertain that my children were receiving a full-time education suitable to their needs and aptitude. I have been meaning to do a video on report writing, which I will do, and so if you think that sort of thing is going to be helpful to you, or if any of my videos have provided you with any value, I would really appreciate you subscribing. Like, I don't know if you can see just down here, wherever my channel name is, like we are almost at 1,000 followers, which is amazing. And I'm not going to leave you on that negative of like, don't ignore the LA, because it could be really serious. Let's try and leave on a positive bit of advice on how to start home educating in 2024 and beyond. Like, once you're in the position to start home educating, just take a deep breath. Loosen the expectations on yourself and your children. Know that doubts are going to come into your mind, and that is normal because school has become so normalised, and it's hard for anyone to keep that messaging out of your brain. But remember that there are loads of us doing it already. And we all find it hard at times because basically having a family, having children is hard in the society that we live in at the moment. But our kids are not being damaged by it. They're not turning out weird. They are learning and they are as normal as anyone can be or wants to be. You will find like-minded people, and there are always people like me if you want to ask questions about, or just vent if that is what you need to do. And if you want a reminder of why school isn't always the best place for kids, in my personal opinion, then you can watch this next. See you on the next video.